There's a bizarre scenario today where the number of people that are working in Australia has increased in the past month. In fact, full-time employment went up by 29,000 workers. Part-time employment has gone up by 47,000 people. Now, amazingly, there are places that are not doing that well, including Victoria, where their jobless rate is now the worst since the COVID-19 lockdowns. But unbelievably, despite the fact that more people have a job, there is a chance that those who have a job are going to find an even harder time to pay off their mortgage. Now, as you've just heard, and as seems to be the case when it comes to the economy, the employment story isn't necessarily a story of strength. It is logically, but of course in the wider ebb and flow of the economy, there being essentially a very few people who are out of work becomes a problem with the economy. So interest rates may have to rise. Now, what is particularly interesting about this interest rate rise is there have already been 15 of them. There have been 15 of them since this Labor government came to power. And in a moment, I'll talk about the endless gaslighting that this government wants to put in place. The best thing they could possibly do is to create an economy with the lowest interest rates possible. If interest rates go up again, then they will be at the highest rates they have ever been since before the pandemic. This is hundreds of thousands of people who will be financially in a tougher spot, in a harder spot. And that's where the problem of our economy means that the dog ends up chasing its own tail and eventually catches up to it and is just a spiral that no one wants to be in. Warren Hogan, the economist, explains this phenomena.
I think the market interpretation is the RBA is going to have to respond to this, whether it's in August or later in the year. This shows you that the economy is not falling into a hole just yet. And I think the Reserve Bank's got itself a big problem with inflation.
But the truth is the government wants to pretend there's nothing to see here. Remember, we turned the corner before the last election. There were going to be massive interest rate drops during the second term. Well, of course, all of that's been eroded, and we're about to get worse than we have ever been in terms of the interest rate cycle under this particular government. And today we've got a bit of an insight into the Prime Minister and the Labor Party about the organisation and the people that they care about the most, the ones of which are their flock. You can see the excitement that any and everyone with a connection to the Labor Party has, not about federal parliament where they can do things for the country, but no, this is about the party that is in an incredibly strong electoral position with 90 seats in the parliament, with relatively dominant positions in the South Australian Parliament, the West Australian Parliament, a likelihood of being re-elected in New South Wales, giant question marks over Victoria, and of course Queensland, where the LNP is sitting pretty, but still not by some massive margin that Labor is out in the cold there for some time. Tassie, well, it's a world unto itself, one that I'm pleased is still currently being run by a coalition government. But I want to show you the contrast in the way they behave when they don't need your vote versus when they need your vote. At the ALP conference today, it's as many people as possible in the room, brightly lit, all of the banners from ceiling to floor. The rah-rah is virtually at an American level when you see the political drapery that they put around their own party conference. And when the Prime Minister strides into the hall, as he will many times over and over, the absolute joy on the Prime Minister's face is because the dream of anyone in the Labor Party, from the youngest of activists to the oldest of MPs, is to be sitting at the very tippy top of the Labor throne. And you can see how excited the Prime Minister is to be walking into this national conference at the absolute peak of his Labor Party powers. Now, I want you to remember that image. That's how they truly think of themselves. That's how they truly feel about their party, is that they are at absolute max right now. And while they would be hoping for 100 seats in the mid-90s is a pretty damn strong position. Now, yes, the opinion polls, well, they tell us 6 out of 10 people don't like what the job the Prime Minister is doing, but their assumption is that essentially the overall fight still remains 55% Labor, 45% the centre-right of Australian politics. But when the government needs your vote and the Labor Party, well, they suddenly start to just act a little more humble. One of the political bits of theatre that I wanted to point out is about how they present themselves when they need your vote. For example, this was their election launch at the most recent one. There's a lot of people, but it's not as many people. There's not the triumvirate banners everywhere. Yes, there is the hand raising, but it's not as over the top as when they are celebrating themselves. When they are trying to get your vote, it's all a little more muted, right? Just a note on the difference where they hope that you don't remember how they behave for 2.5 of the 3 years. They hope that they can change the perception of themselves or the demonising of their opposition in that last 6 months. Which brings us to the overall central problem that existed, frankly, ever since the pandemic. It bedevilled the Liberal Party towards the end of its run, and it has been a relentless problem in every poll for as long as Albanese has been the Prime Minister. In fact, the most recent one, just this week, says 70% of Australians feel the country is headed in the wrong direction. The survey has found that pessimism in the electorate is now at a record high. Almost half of Australians, predominantly under the age of 50, believe the standard of living is worse than their parents at a similar stage of life. A real sense that the country is going backwards. And as much as they would like to pretend that there's some sort of evil systemic force, the government has been in charge of those living standards now for 1 and a bit terms. It has been around for long enough to take the credit on the good news, but try to pretend the bad news isn't their fault. Well, again, if you're willing to give yourself the gold star for what's happened in the past 4 years, well, then you have to cop sometimes the kick in the backside that comes from the reality of the past 4 years. And the Prime Minister was at his patronising and gaslighting worst today when he said that economic hardship is not imagined. Well, thanks, Scoop. We're the ones living it, but please tell us how you notice from up on high of your chair as the leader of the country, the boss of the Labor Party, the man with the mansion on the hill.
I understand that for many Australians right now, looking to the future runs second to the immediate pressures that they are under. The last decade has inflicted one global shock after another, and people have been given every reason to feel like the economy is simply not working for them. That goes deeper than sentiment. It's a reality people are up against.
Don't you love this? Oh, we recognise that you're feeling the problems. Now, sure, these people have got almost half a dozen pay rises since they came to power. We've talked about the increase in the number of staff that all the politicians get so they can make those crappy social media videos which patronise people, treating them, frankly, as preschoolers, which is why we show it to you each and every night. This is what they really think of you. But the reality of the economy under Albanese is something that we've talked about almost every night since he became the Prime Minister. And while it's not easy under Albanese was rejected at the 2022 election, it was an absolute forerunner to the reality of life. Now, they talk about the last decade and all these global shocks. Well, there's plenty of problems that have happened here in Australia. Like most recently, hundreds of thousands of Australians now living beyond their means. Why? Because they're in mortgage stress. Why? Because the interest rate level has gone up 15 times, almost 16, if you are to believe the economists. And that has caused huge problems for average Australians, regardless of how they vote. 1 in 6 Australian households are the ones that are admitting that they are having problems paying the power bills that he promised would be cheaper, either with the $275, which of course was modelling and never really counted apparently, or the reality of the transition to a brand new system. One that, if you remember those old debates I used to have with Nicholas Rees, I don't argue that in the end there might be a different outcome, but the cost of getting there is hundreds of millions of dollars. It ends up being billions of dollars. It ends up being almost $1 trillion. And that gets paid for by the people who can't afford for everything to keep getting harder. Not to mention what seems to be the boring talking point to this Prime Minister, because I mention it, I suppose he punishes the charities that constantly come forward and say that 20% of Australia is in severe food insecurity. What have I told you before? Almost 4 million households, it's not people, households, that will run out of food each and every week. How nice of the Prime Minister to say that it is a reality, one that, of course, he tries to spin or change or divert or deny. And anyone in small business knows that to be the case. Anyone who has been to the local shopping centre will notice that when one shop closes, another one doesn't open the next day. Once you get into the smaller suburban malls, there's plenty of empty spaces. And even then, the stuff that replaces it is kind of all those junk shops rather than a small business trying to make its way in the world. So thank you, Prime Minister, for finally recognising that economic hardship is a reality. For those of us who have talked about it the whole time, for those of us that are living it, we've known it the whole time. Yet the Prime Minister says front and centre the total focus of his government is to do everything possible when it comes to cost of living. Okay, answer me just one question, Prime Minister. Why did you increase fuel taxes again? Why will you increase fuel taxes again, twice, despite the fact that, yes, while the global oil shock may not be the same, the need to save every dollar is more profound than ever before? But of course, you're doing everything you can, right? Please. And again, the reality of life for a great many Australians is an uncomfortable one. This shouldn't be a country where you feel that, where you feel those financial pressures all the time. And it doesn't matter if you're a self-funded retiree, if you're a young person that's working, if you're a middle-aged person who's working. None of us feel like the joint is going the way that it should. And while the Prime Minister wants to pretend that that somehow coded language is all Trump's fault, the reality is that this government, while it claims to fix things, it does things that are all about buying votes. The reality is, remember, they turned around and they gave and then took away some support when it came to paying your energy bills. Sure, they'll invent a new version of spending that money again just before the election. But remember, they started off by taking $1,500 of assistance away. They've just found ways to redeploy 200 million here or 500 million there. But they've never really been able to turn around and say the $1,500 that was there at the start is still the assistance that's there at this moment. But there's something even more serious that probably is beyond government, and it's about us. It's either how we feel personally or plenty of people in our family, let alone friendship groups, are feeling. And that is the issues in and around loneliness, in and around that sense of despair. And while this is not as much fun to talk about as ripping into lefties, it is a real problem, and I know that there will be plenty of people who are feeling this right now that are watching us live or watching this video whenever it appears in your feed. And so more evidence to all of this today. It comes from the Turnbull Times that Australia's life dissatisfaction levels have doubled as wellbeing poverty reaches new highs. Now, this is not because people don't have enough cement in their diet and they don't harden up, but here's the deal. 2.2 million Australians 15 years and older are living below the wellbeing poverty line, with a share of people reporting very low life satisfaction doubling over the last decade. In 2025, 9.7 or 1 in 10 Australians rated their general satisfaction with life at 4 or below out of a rank of 10. This is from the Australian Bureau of Statistics and their social survey. This number compares with 1 in 20, so again, essentially a doubling of the problem since this was first looked at, or most recently looked at in 2014. Now, the reality is that governments want to pretend when they're oppositions that the government is the whole problem. And then when they eventually get to government, they have to pretend that they are offering the solutions. When the reality is that there are many inputs that governments choose to make that see a lack of support. We've seen that around things that were available, like telehealth for mental health support. That's been cut by this government. A little later tonight, I'm going to talk about the number of kids that are on a waiting list for a taxpayer-funded mental health support. Now, again, there'll be part of you that says, well, hang on, none of that was there when I was a kid and my life was just as tough. Sure, I understand, but the reality is the kids aren't all right. Every survey tells us the kids aren't all right. The Kids Helpline have more calls than ever before, and that's not because they're a bunch of sooks. It's because there is an awful lot of pressure that exists on all of us as individuals, us as families, and failures in the wider society. This report description continues that amid an explosion in support for far-right and populist politics, those reporting life satisfaction scores of 4 or below are more likely to feel alienated and disempowered by their community and express lower support for multiculturalism. Do you like that little sting in the tail? Only 15% of people who are experiencing wellbeing poverty feel that they have a say on important matters affecting their communities, against the average of 32% across all Australians. And this is where it does get a little bit more political. Now, winner take all is, generally speaking, the attitude of politics. It is particularly the attitude of the current mob of people that are in charge of the Labor Party. You've seen the brutality in Victoria, that if you were a small business during the COVID time, you've seen the brutality in Victoria if you are one of the 70% of Victorians who believe that there should be a royal commission into the $15 billion worth of corruption that apparently is in and around the big build. But also I would suggest that the second part of what I just read to you is also that sense too of the theme that I've spoken about a long time, but I've certainly been focusing on since I found that badge of the Labor Party. Remember the old badge? Put Australia first, the Australian flag. That's how Bob Hawke used to appeal as a Labor leader during times of an election. Well, now if you display the Australian flag, you're either a bogan or a racist. And if you say put Australia first, then somehow you're part of far right-wing politics. If you believe that anyone can come to the country as long as they love the country as much as everyone else who's in the country, again, somehow you're dog whistling in support of monoculture as opposed to the diversity is our strength excuse that is thrown up about the multiplicity of changes. We've gone in recent years from public parades on Australia Day to those being pushed aside and banned. A shame about the celebration of a national day, because people who don't want any celebration of any national day try to pretend that the national day we focus on is too problematic, too difficult, as if somehow the 13th of October would be any better on any one of those issues. If you are one of those that would be anywhere near that survey that I've just spoken about, yes, it's money. Yes, it's family breakdown. Yes, it's cultural breakdown. But it also is a sense of disempowerment that comes when you're on the wrong side of a government's agenda. When they say that having pride in what we took for granted yesterday is a culture war, when they turn around and change it. Again, you have not changed. They have changed. And because they have changed, they turn around and say that you and I don't understand modern Australia as it is, as if we don't have a set of eyes to see how buildings get bigger, cities get busier, the things we talk about with our friends change over the years because someone at the other end of the table is always going to blow up if you bring up that subject. Wellbeing is about a lot of things. Living with a government that you didn't vote for is difficult because they come up with new ways every day of reminding you why you never wanted them to be there. But the sign of a leader is somebody who understands that those who didn't vote for them have just as much right to care about the direction of the country as the majority who end up voting for them. Again, the Prime Minister today pretending that I formally recognise your right to feel reality about economic hardship. But then in the same speech says that if you want to discuss any of those cultural things that they changed, you didn't change, you didn't vote for, you weren't asked about, that you're somehow fighting a needless and pointless culture war. No. I say it for the 800th time tonight. They changed. You didn't. Now, again, speaking about that brutality that exists when certain governments have been around for too long, like Jacinta Allen's government in Victoria, they've been around for too long. They have filled every possible position, the deputy, the deputy, the deputy, the deputy, the deputy, the janitor, and the security guard, with Labor-aligned people. It means that the political fight is not a fair one. It means that the titanic task of trying to unseat a government that has got so many roots, so deep in the ground, so far across the horizon of their location, this time being Victoria, means we get garbage like this. James Newbury is a Liberal MP in Victoria. He wrote online in May of this year, TikTok Jacinta Allen, Victoria is coming for Labor with baseball bats. Okay, didn't say it in an interview. He put it out on Twitter and we all know what that means, which means when the election comes, Labor will be punished, just as previous ones have. But of course, because of the term baseball bats, there's some implied violence here because the Premier is Jacinta Allen, not Daniel Andrews, then somehow the violence takes on a gendered nature. This was one of the independent candidates in a recent by-election when this all came out.
There is no place for the language of violence in our politics, not from anyone, and especially not from the person who wants to be our Attorney General. And Jess Wilson, the Leader of the Opposition, has said nothing. Not last night, not this morning, nothing. The standard you walk past is the standard you accept. Right now, Jess Wilson is walking past this. I'm calling on Jess Wilson to condemn the post.
Well, I'm calling on that lady to condemn The Guardian because they in 2019 said, for the Nationals, voters in the bush are clearly waiting with baseball bats. I'm waiting for that person to condemn the ABC because voters there were waiting with baseball bats. Now, today, a parliamentary committee, i.e. stacked with the Labor Party, have turned around and have ruled that the tweet that you just saw, and we all know the political metaphor that he is using about voters waiting for baseball bats, have found him guilty, like guilty as if it's a criminal offence of parliamentary misconduct. Now, what about this? All of this is the idea about how they come for you. They kill you with the process, otherwise known as lawfare, which is how long the process takes, how stacked it is against you. Following a 6-week process, the Commission found that Mr Newbury engaged in parliamentary misconduct for failing to create a safe and respectful workplace because he'd named the Premier, and that the posts were associated with acts of violence. Remember, the metaphor that was good enough for The Guardian, that's used by the ABC. Oh, but when it's used by somebody from the right, well, it's violent. So now it doesn't matter what the context is, it doesn't matter what the reality is, they just get to throw the word guilty, guilty, guilty around as if there was a crime committed here. They get to use terms like parliamentary misconduct, making it seem like something really dodgy happened. Mr Newbury, in his defence during this 6-week process, pointed out the political metaphor of voters taking baseball bats to ballot boxes had been popularly used for more than 2 decades. But the Commission found the posts to be unreasonable. Quote, the Commission accepts that some readers could interpret the language used in the post as metaphorical expression of political opposition rather than a literal call for violence. 6 weeks this process took. Nevertheless, the Commission considers the use of violent rhetoric creates a foreseeable risk that the statement could be understood to be endorsing or trivialising violence. That risk is particularly acute in an era of instantaneous communication and broad social media reach where the published message, what is intended and how it is read does not always align. I mean, this is the rubbish, the thought police stuff. Now, again, in free speech, you have the right to say whatever you want and people have a right to react to it. But you don't have a right to say what that person meant. It was obvious what that was about. But they just invent a process. They lock you in it for 6 weeks. They hang a cloud over your head. They then come up with a ruling that makes it seem like you committed a crime. In response, Victoria is so broken, says James Newbury today, that Labor-appointed public servants are forcing us to be courteous to Jacinta Allen and gagging us from saying Labor is going to get flogged at the November election. So let me say it again. Victorians are waiting with baseball bats. Good on him. And no Labor-appointed public servant should have the right to tell any Victorian that they are gagged from saying just that. Halle freaking Luya. Well done, James. No doubt they'll come for you again. No doubt they'll find some new way to punish you. There are just 12 days left, by the way, of the Victorian parliamentary sitting calendar. Watch how fast the process goes. This one won't take 6 weeks. Good on him for taking a stand. And again, a further point to underline in all this, this is the grey corruption that the Victorian Ombudsman has talked about, that when you've been around for so long and you've stacked everything, they become loyal to the party of government, not work for the government, i.e. the people. That's the reason. One of, but that is the reason to change the government in Victoria in November. Whatever metaphor you choose to wish is yours. Just vote to get rid of them. And just quickly, I want to talk about scamming for a second here, because there are plenty of people who fall victim to it, and they genuinely, many of these people deserve our sympathy. Why? Because you think you're doing the right thing. I'm not talking about the person who says, hey, send us your details because we'll send you $1 million. No, $2 billion is being stolen from people. That's the reality of it, is somebody stealing. Now, the reality is, if you get a message saying, hey, call Microsoft, don't call Microsoft. That's a scam. If it's somebody saying, hey, call Apple, don't do that. That's a scam. There's, in fact, an education campaign that's kind of funny being put around by the federal police this year.
Excuse me, mate.
Have I done something wrong?
That's right, Agent Index. Looks like he didn't check whether this link came from his real bank. Are you fit to click, mate? You know, pausing to verify the link, multi-factor authentication, creating unique passphrases. Look, I'm going to let you off with a warning this time, but next time, we want to see you more click fit. You got it?
It's cute, the idea that the police officer is warning you or giving you a warning. You get the point right there. But I wanted to tell you about a new scam, because AI is being used by these evil people to try to trick you out of your money. Now, this is a one called the Hey Mum scam. Now, unbelievably, you now have to have some doubt about messages that might be left on your phone. Here's Channel 7 explaining how it works, and if you get a message like this, don't respond.
Well, the notorious Hi Mum scam is being taken to new heights, with scammers using AI to snag more victims. We're being warned fraudsters can take a 10-second snippet of someone's voice and mimic it with software, giving them the ability to call a victim and plead for help using the cloned voice. It is a cruel hoax. It's traditionally relied on text messaging tricking thousands.
So don't fall for this. The best way, if you get a message like that, is obviously to pick up the telephone number and call the actual person who this claims to be coming from. Also, with these things, you've got to have the strength to be able to ignore it until you can actually get that conversation and contact with your family. Now, there are all types of scams that are around, and there's a lot of people who live busy lives, so maybe you might click on the wrong thing at the wrong time. Scamwatch is the website that is run to learn more about this, okay? It's scamwatch.gov.au, or just Google Scamwatch Australia and you'll be able to learn a little bit more about it, because I don't want you to fall prey to this stuff, because these people are evil.
Australia is now 15 interest rate hikes deep since Labor took the wheel, and the government's pre-election promise of massive rate drops has aged about as well as an opened carton of milk in a February heatwave. 15 hikes. That is not a cycle. That is a demolition job. Quick favour, if you are the kind of person who loves Australia and wants to stay sharp on what is actually happening in our country's politics, hit that subscribe button and click the notifications bell. It keeps this channel alive. Over 90% of viewers watching right now have not subscribed yet, and it would genuinely mean the world to us if you did. Thank you. Now, back to the show. G'day Australia, welcome to AUS Politics Report. Let us sit with the numbers for a moment, because they tell a story the press conferences never will. The economy added 29,000 full-time jobs and 47,000 part-time jobs in the latest figures. On any government's talking points, that reads like a win. And yet, here's where the fairy tale collapses. 1 in 5 Australian households, roughly 4 million families, are now in severe food insecurity. Not tightening the belt, not cutting back on luxuries, food insecurity, in a country that exports enough to feed tens of millions beyond its borders. Strong jobs and empty pantries are not supposed to live in the same sentence. When they do, it means the system is not misfiring, it's wired wrong. And the hits keep landing. That $275 energy rebate Labor campaigned on, Paul Murray labelled it perfectly this week. Modelled, not real. A number that worked beautifully inside a Treasury spreadsheet and never once touched a single household power bill. Meanwhile, the renewable energy transition is running a tab that economists now estimate in the hundreds of billions, potentially trillions, and every cent of it lands on the same families who are already skipping meals and praying the rate rises stop. Do not forget to like and subscribe. It helps this channel reach more Australians who want the real story without the fluff. But here's where the crisis shifts from your wallet to something harder to measure and arguably more dangerous. The Australian Bureau of Statistics, again not a commentator, not a think tank, the ABS, reports that 1 in 10 Australians now rate their life satisfaction at 4 out of 10 or lower. That figure has doubled since 2014. 2.2 million Australians aged 15 and over are living below what researchers call the wellbeing poverty line. Kids Helpline is fielding record core volumes. Telehealth mental health services have been cut. And of the Australians in wellbeing poverty, only 15% believe they have any say whatsoever in the decisions shaping their community. That is not frustration. That is a population quietly unplugging from democracy. Which brings us, neatly enough, to how the political class is spending its time. Victoria, under entrenched Labor rule, recently devoted 6 weeks to investigating Liberal MP James Newbury for tweeting that voters should come for Labor with baseball bats. A political metaphor used by The Guardian, used by the ABC, used by every press gallery journalist with a keyboard. But Victoria's Labor-stacked parliamentary committee ruled it created a foreseeable risk of endorsing violence. 6 weeks for a figure of speech. The Victorian Ombudsman has a name for this kind of governance: grey corruption. Not outright theft, not scandal, just the slow, methodical conversion of public institutions into party-aligned machinery that protects its own and punishes anyone outside the tent. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.